From shootings at Paris night spots to a bombing at the National Stadium and multiple stabbings, France's string of tragedies has claimed hundreds of lives. For years, this country has been a top Western target for terror groups.
Le niveau de menace qui prévaut dans notre pays.
The level of threat that prevails over our country is high. It can take the form of a structured organization wanting to apply a powerful means of destruction, or even an individual.
Elle peut prendre parfois aussi la forme d'un individu.
France's former president, François Hollande, declared a state of emergency in 2015, and it's been renewed several times since. Police say it's helped foil more than a dozen incidents in the last year. But the attacks continue. This weekend, 2 young women were stabbed to death in the port city of Marseille. Prosecutors opened a terror investigation into the attack. And days later, lawmakers approved new measures to try to stop the violence for good.
Pour 415 contre 127.
French police have been given sweeping new powers to set up perimeters around places like airports and train stations and carry out spot checks more freely. Places of worship can be closed down if radical ideology is thought to be promoted. Government officials, instead of judges, can order house raids and arrests without a warrant. And all these measures are being enshrined into permanent law. But these new powers have roused concerns among leftist parties that emergency laws are being normalized.
This law grants authorities draconian powers to restrain liberties with no sufficient guarantees against abuses put in place.
NGOs, including the United Nations, also say certain minorities in France will become increasingly stigmatized. But France's far-right party, Front National, thinks the law should target certain communities.
Nous devons rétablir la double peine.
We must reinstate the double punishment that Nicolas Sarkozy abolished. That means the systematic expulsion of convicted foreign offenders and irregular migrants.
Most people in France are in favor of better security. A new poll has found that 57% of French people support the new terror laws. The question is, will they work? Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in studio is Uluç Özülker. He's the former Turkish ambassador to France and the former Turkish permanent representative to the EU. And from Paris is Anne Le Breton. She's the deputy mayor of Paris's 4th district. Also from Paris, we have Yasser Louati. He's the chairman of the Justice and Liberties for All Committee and co-author of the European Islamophobia report. I thank you all for joining us on the program. And it looks like from the outset that France is ending a state of emergency, but just giving authorities state of emergency-like powers permanently with this new law. Is that how it is?
No, I don't think so. We've tried to get out of the state of emergency, which obviously we couldn't stay in, by doing a law that was much more balanced between what the citizen expect us to do about terrorism and what was going on with the state of emergency, which obviously couldn't last any longer.
Yasser Louati, the bill was approved by 415 votes to 127, 19 abstentions. Le Figaro newspaper found that 57% of French people polled were in favor of this new anti-terror law. That's democracy, right? The French people want it, Yasser.
No, absolutely not. That's effective fear-mongering under a police state. First, 57% of the French people abstained from voting during the parliamentary elections, which actually questions the legitimacy of the people who passed that law. As for the public opinion you just mentioned, of course, when we tell them that these laws will only target a small problematic quote-unquote enemy within, as we saw it with the state of emergency, that these Muslims are problematic and that these laws will not apply to the majority population, then of course we can pass any measure. The fear now is that once you set a precedent by attacking a minority in a country, then those laws become applicable unacceptable against the rest of the population. And we saw it, for example, after the beginning of the state of emergency. First, they began raiding and ransacking Muslim homes and mosques and houses, and then they attacked whom? Union leaders, environmentalists, and the list goes on. So this is a very sad day for democracy in France, and I hope that the very same people who passed this law will stop lecturing other countries on human rights and the rule of law.
Anne Le Breton, does the law target Muslims?
Of course not, it doesn't target Muslims. About almost 10% of French people are Muslim. Why would we target 10% of our population? This is absolutely ludicrous. And this law has to do with
because
terrorism.
It's very easy to do so.
And that's the subject of the law, terrorism.
Yeah, so tell me why you think it targets Muslims.
Then first, if the state of emergency and these repressive measures were so effective, then explain this. 4,500 raids have been carried, leading only to 30 investigations in relation to terrorism. France's ombudsman, Jacques Toubon, said that these measures will target 90% of the time Muslims. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International said these measures have targeted and will continue to target Muslims. The UN sent a letter to France with clear worries that these measures will target Muslims. The people who have been targeted by all these raids, ransacking of their homes, restaurants and mosques, were Muslims. When you say that 10% of the population is Muslim, yes, of course, but in order to make the 90% feel safe, you just tell them, don't worry, these laws will only apply to them. And the track record of France's repression in terms of terrorism have specifically targeted Muslims. So there is, on one hand, political marketing to say that, yes, Muslims are our citizens, etc. And then you have a reality. And reality shows that the French government has not waged a war on the root causes of terrorism, but has been rather looking for a scapegoat. And this scapegoat, unfortunately, again, are the Muslim population who are the first victims of terrorism anywhere in the world, and now here at home in the West are also targeted by repression.
Let me ask the former Turkish ambassador to France. If this law helps the French to keep their people safe from terrorism, isn't it a good thing? Turkey knows what it's like to face terrorism. Turkey has tough laws as well when it comes to terrorism. If this keeps the French people safe, why not, Ambassador?
Normally, when you live in France, you know two things about the French people. The first thing is that they always have a spirit of contradiction. Whenever they introduce something, they are against it after a while. 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, I cannot say this, but in any case, there is a spirit of contradiction which is well established in the customs of this country. Secondly, so I'm asking myself, now this law is replacing this state of emergency law, which the parliament and the French people, so-called, are not willing to continue with. So what will they do? They are replacing an occasional law with a permanent system.
But you believe it's like a state of emergency?
Well, of course. I mean, it's not solving the problems which, with which the French people have faced with until now, but it's even hardening a little bit the situation in France.
They say they've thwarted 17 attacks in 2016 as a result of their tough measures. Are they lying, or do you want to give them credit that maybe this approach is helping them thwart terrorism?
Let's consider the situation from another angle, if you wish. All of these 17 attacks, terrorist attacks, came from the Muslim population inside the country, or from the ISIS people who were imported from abroad, if you wish. So in reality, France was suffering of the terrorist attacks, not from, especially from the French people's side as such, in bracket, but from the Muslim side, if I may put it this way.
Within their borders?
Well...
was it a homegrown problem for them?
Yes. Well, inside the European Union, the borders are free, and the terrorists were trespassing the borders easily, freely, and were coming to France. But when the investigations concerning the attacks have ended, everybody knew that all this was from inside the country and not from outside.
Okay. Let me ask Anne Le Breton, as we kind of take a closer look at some of the details of the law, when we see that police can conduct house raids and searches without a warrant or judicial oversight, including at night, extra powers to officials to place people under house arrest outside the normal judicial process, wiretaps by intel agencies based on algorithms. You can close a place of worship if you believe the preacher is preaching hate. That sounds very much like a state of emergency. Can you tell me that you feel comfortable with all of that being enshrined in law forever and ever? Are you fully comfortable with that, Anne?
It's never enshrined in law forever and ever because laws can change, and also the law has not gone through all the parliamentary work, so it still can be amended. I will react, however, to one thing Ambassador Özülker said that really distressed me, is that distinction he made between French and Muslims, Muslims not being French. We don't consider this a situation. In France, French Muslims are French, and I disagree very much with the distinction you chose to make, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay, you disagree with that distinction. Okay, fair enough.
Or French
but
citizens.
let me ask you, because it's interesting when you said that laws can change and it still hasn't fully been passed, which suggests to me that you disagree with some of the stuff that I listed to you there. It suggests to me that you're not fully comfortable with all those things.
No, it's not that I'm comfortable or not comfortable. It's that the law still hasn't been completely passed. So there might be, you know, a few amendments here and there if they're going to check the constitutionality of everything. So it's not a finished, completely finished law. That's all I'm saying.
So forget that I said forever and ever. I'm saying enshrined in law. Are you comfortable with all these things? Conducting house raids, searches without a warrant, skirting the judicial process, wiretaps by intel agencies, usually without a warrant, based on algorithms, closing down places of worship. In this specific context, probably mostly mosques. Are you okay with all of that, Anne?
Well, first of all, none of what you have listed is forever. Everything has a limit in time, and everything is done under the control of a judge. So it's not the right for the police to do anything they want. There's going to be a judge there, and it will be always under the control of a judge.
So you're fine with it?
Yes, and you know, in France, the justice is very independent from, you know, we have a very independent justice.
Uluç Özülker, maybe
we have a lot of counter powers.
Okay, Uluç Özülker, are you, firstly, are you convinced by any of that? And secondly, Anne Le Breton says you made a distinction between French and Muslims. Do you want to clarify that, or did you?
Oh, yes. Well, I was ambassador in Paris, and I'm a graduate of the French-speaking school, Galatasaray. So since then, since years, I have been in close contact with France, and I like the French people as much as the country. I am very much acquainted with the customs and habits, etc. But on the other hand, when I was ambassador, I went to the suburbs and I discussed with those people who were coming from the different countries. For example, I was the one with Mr. Sarkozy to introduce the law on the foreigners, and we discussed quite a bit. There is a problem which intrigued me from the beginning. In France, unfortunately, since long time, from the beginning, the Muslim population is, it seems to be considered as a second-class people. So the French are always more eligible than the others. So this is why in the big cities, particularly, the suburbs come to invest, let's say, and by power, they are fighting back to get their rights,
But you
etc.
say second-class citizens, right? There is no law on the books which makes them second-class citizens.
It's
so what makes that happen?
Psychologically speaking, they are not considered as being
On the
first
contrary.
class. This is what I witnessed as a foreigner in France from abroad.
And?
Well, obviously, I'm going to disagree strongly, very, very strongly with that. We have people from, Muslim French people who are in parliament, who are in responsibility in the government. France is changing a lot. There has been problems in the past. We have a long history that we have to, deal with. Algeria was once a French department. We have a lot of people who come from Algeria who are now French. I'm not saying that everything has been a paradise throughout the years, but France is changing, and definitely I strongly disagree with you, Mr. Ambassador, on your analysis.
And let's go back to the law here, right? So you both disagree on some of the root causes of perhaps grievances amongst the Muslim population within France. And what do you think of what the UN Special Rapporteur had to say? That the law contains provisions that could harm the rights to liberty, security, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. Don't you think that it's incumbent on the Macron government to look at this closely and maybe think again if you have the UN Special Rapporteur with those dire warnings?
As I said, the law has not completely passed yet. There will be another session going back between the Senate and the Parliament. So things might change here and there.
Do you want it softened?
In France, we have a very, very different... Well, I'm not really, I'm not here to give my personal opinion about things. But what I'm trying to say here is France has a very different way of looking at civil liberties than other countries like England or the United States might look at it. So we have a different tradition. We come from a different way of looking at things. And a lot of the criticism I hear, I don't think quite apply to our history with the lay state. We have a specific history concerning civil liberties that is not the same as we might have in other Western countries.
Yasser shaking his head in disagreement.
And you have to take that into account.
Okay, Yasser, come in.
This is quite unbelievable to hear this absolute nonsense. What does it mean that there is again French exceptionalism in terms of civil liberties? The French state has been ransacking mosques and Muslim homes and restaurants. What kind of interpretation of civil liberties can we have? When you have the French state applying mass surveillance on the back of, quote unquote, as Manuel Valls said, the enemy within. When you have people now going to school scared that they might be reported under the accusation of radicalization. What are you talking about, madam? We are talking about now the state having absolute powers and to be able to implement drastic measures on mere suspicion. We went from tackling, quote unquote, in the 1950s, dangerous behavior to tackling, quote unquote, reasons to believe there is suspicious behavior. And again, I'm sending you to the track record of all these measures. First, they failed to prevent terrorist attacks, as we saw it multiple times, like in the Bastille Day attack of last year. And second, these measures are also criticized by domestic intelligence. When you have the National Secretary of National Defense saying that France's strategy based on all repressive measures has failed and we need to change our strategy and speak directly with communities instead of terrorizing them, this is not an interpretation of civil liberties. It's a question of protecting national cohesion. And what's happened today is that we have been sending, or you have been selling this project as somehow necessary extreme measures. For 20 years, over 20 measures have been passed against terrorism. Yet all our lives now are at stake, and on top of that, we have to bear the cost of losing our basic freedoms. So please, don't tell us we have a different understanding of civil liberties. It is now quite an opportunity for the state to gain absolute powers, and then not only to crush any dissident voice, but also to tell public opinion, you know what, there is an enemy within, and we are going after them. And if it had worked again, you would have prevented all these terrorist attacks.
Okay, we're running out of time. I want to get a final word from the ambassador here. Interestingly, looking at it from a different perspective, someone who was not too far away from the presidency, Marine Le Pen, She said she thinks the law is defensive and soft and it doesn't go far enough. Ambassador Uluç Özülker, would you like the law to be thrown out? Or do you think that if you kind of water it down or soften it in some way, France can maybe find a balance between protecting its citizens from terrorism, but also maintaining civil liberties? Is that possible, Ambassador?
It is possible because it is in the... France has inherited since the revolution in 1789 some principles: fraternity, liberty, and equality is the main dictum of France. And France, as far as I understand, French people are very much devoted to their individual liberties, freedom of expression, freedom of everything. So they are very jealous in defending their rights in this respect.
I must apologize, but we are out of time. Ambassador Uluç Özülker, Anne Le Breton and Yasser Louati, I know it feels unfair that you all didn't get a chance to speak fully, but this is the nature of the program. My apologies. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.